Welcome to a new academic year here at UCLA, and welcome to the new year of the Behavior, Evolution, and Culture Speaker Series. I'm Professor Clark Barrett in anthropology, for people who don't know me. Before I introduce our speaker today, since it's the first talk of the year, I'm just going to say a few things about our plan for this year, a little bit about the Beck series, and so on. The Beck series, Behavior, Evolution, and Culture, is part of the Center for Behavior, Evolution, and Culture, which is a multi-departmental center on campus. This speaker series is kind of the main sort of center of activity of the center. We do also sometimes host visiting researchers and other kinds of events, including one which I'll mention in a moment. But we have our speaker series throughout the academic year here in this room, and it's open to the public. Everyone is welcome to come. There is a website, bec.ucla.edu, where you can find the schedule of talks. You can find more about our center. It is a nonprofit. You can make a donation to the center. We do not have a permanent budget, so we do welcome donations of any kind from either people here or people who you might know. Who might be interested in donating, and we are supported by donations. You can also sign up for the listserv. So there's a tab on the website. I think it says "Getting Involved," and it's automated. You can there's a field where you can enter your email, and you can either subscribe or unsubscribe. And if you do that, I'm sure everyone here is already on the email list, but you will get the weekly announcements for the talks and any other events that we might have. This year, we're trying something a little bit different, which is bi-weekly talks. There may be some differences of opinion about whether this is good or bad. We're going to try it for now. We can always revert to the weekly talks later if people find that they are really dying for an every week event. But I will take a poll on that later in the quarter and see how people feel about it. But we do have a variety of events. So we're going to have a talk today, and then I would also mention, I think everyone knows about this already, we have a very special event that we've been planning for over a year now, which is a screening of the Netflix series Chimp Empire. And it will screen probably the first episode, and we'll have the director of the series, James Reed, who is an Emmy award-winning director, the director of My Octopus Teacher. He'll be there as part of the roundtable. Professor John Matani from University of Michigan will be there, who is a primatologist and a former Beck speaker, who consulted on the series. And so we'll have a discussion with him, James, and Sarah Edelson, who is in charge of documentary programming for Netflix. So at 6, we're gonna meet. It's in the CNSI auditorium, which is the California Neuroscience Institute, I think it is. Very nice auditorium, and there'll be a little reception. We'll screen the show. Afterwards, we'll sit down, and me and Abby Begum will moderate a discussion with John, James, and Sarah. And then after that, there's going to be a reception with food and drinks and so on. So please come. There's an RSVP link that you can find on our website if you haven't RSVP'd already. So that'll be 6 p.m. on Monday, October 7th, and there won't be a Beck talk that day because of that event. And the last thing I'll mention is there's a smaller event later that week on Thursday, October 10th at noon, which will be down the hall in the Discourse Lab. It's a smaller space. This wasn't available at that time, and our visitor, Professor Gary Braze from University of Kansas, couldn't come on a Monday. But it's also going to be somewhat of a different event. It seats about 15 people in that room, and basically he's workshopping a new book called How to Incite a Scientific Revolution, and he wants input on his ideas for the book. So it won't be necessarily a traditional kind of talk. It may be a little bit more roundtable. Then we'll return to our regular speaker series with Irene Godoy on October 21st. Talking about social aging in kin-structured groups of non-human primates. Before I introduce Peter, I'll just mention too that, like I said, we are supported by generous donations from the Dean's Office, from the Lemelson Foundation, And I should also mention Julia Marlowe and Roger Swagler, who made a generous donation to fund the Frank Marlowe Memorial Speaker Series. The Chimp Empire talk is part of that. The Chimp Empire event and roundtable is part of that Frank Marlowe Memorial Lecture Series. So thanks to all of them. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Peter Todd, Professor in Informatics, Cognitive Science, and Psychology at Indiana University. Peter was, for the last 9 years, until quite recently, the director of the Cognitive Science program at Indiana University. I have known Peter for quite some time because he was my postdoc mentor when I was a postdoctoral scholar at the Center for Adaptive Behavior and Cognition at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin. Peter now runs Adaptive Behavior and Cognition West at Indiana University, and we're still collaborating on several projects. And Peter will tell you a little about that today. Also, he is here visiting all quarter at the Institute for Pure and Applied Mathematics. He'll say something about there's an event that's going on this quarter that he'll say something about, and I'll try to send out some announcements for talks and things like that in that series. So without further ado, welcome Peter.
Happy to be here talking with you all, and exciting to kick off the year here in Indiana. We've already been going for a month, so I don't know why you guys take so long to get going, but happy that I was here when this is all starting, and I'm very pleased to be invited. I am, as Clark said, here for this whole fall as part of the long program that they have for this term at the Institute for Pure and Applied Mathematics on mathematics of intelligences. So it's bringing together a set of 40 people for 3 months to be talking about different mathematical techniques, analysis techniques that can be applied to understand a wide range of different kinds of intelligences. So human intelligences, animal intelligences, artificial intelligence, and as part of that program, there are also 4 one-week-long workshops that people are invited to come to hear the talks there. Those are the traditional kind of workshop conference, mini conference thing of a week's worth of hour-long talks on different topics. We had one last week that was on high-dimensional traces of intelligence and how to analyze those. The next one coming up is on deep learning and machine learning, and so that's much more in an AI direction. The one after that, I think, might be of great interest to a wide range of you, which is on natural intelligences and how to use models to understand human and animal intelligence. And then the last one, which will be in November, end of November, is on collective intelligence, so how intelligence emerges from the interactions of multiple organisms, including humans and animals, or from multiple AIs as well. So we'll send around pointers to those, and IPAM, the Institute for Pure and Applied Mathematics, is just a couple of blocks south of us, and I think for the workshops you may have to register, but that's about it. Also, all the talks that happen there get videotaped and will be up on YouTube too, so you don't necessarily have to come. But the other thing that I want to leave you with is that I am going to be here for 3 months, and I very much look forward to coming to the Beck meetings and having conversations with any of you who are interested in this kind of research or want to talk about any other things in this wheelhouse. And so this can just be the beginning of a longer conversation. All right. So I'm going to start the talk with what are the punchlines. So you can see here's the things to take away. And hopefully we will get to most of them. Oh, I also want to say I'm happy to take questions as we go, and it can be as interactive as people want, unless that's violating local social norms. Whatever you want to do. So I'm going to be talking about how search is a very important aspect of intelligent behavior. And search works in environments that have structure to them. Search also helps to create structures in environments. When we have intelligent agents searching in an environment, as they're searching, as they're finding things, as they are making use of those things, they are changing the environment as well. And that makes it more structured for other agents to be able to search. We'll see some examples of that. I'm going to be focusing on a particular kind of structure of environments, and that is patchy structure, where you don't have resources spread uniformly, but rather in clumps or clusters, and how organisms can make use of patchy structure, which is very common in environments, namely by switching back and forth between exploring to find a patch of some resource, whatever is being sought, and once a patch has been found, then exploiting that patch, staying within that patch, using it up, and then at some point making the decision, okay, now it's time to leave this patch and explore for a new one. And so canonical example of that is foraging, and that's why the talk is about foraging in space in mind. Intelligent searchers create patchy spaces. I'm not going to talk so much about how that happens, but it's an example of this process of agents creating their own environment structure. And all of this is an example of what we call ecological rationality, which is rationality that emerges from the match between the structures that are in the world and the structures that are in the head. And I'm a cognitive scientist. I'm interested in what are the cognitive mechanisms that allow organisms to be able to behave adaptively and intelligently in their environments. So we have talked a lot about ecological rationality in a series of books. This is work that Clark and I were working on together at our research institute in Berlin. And so you can find out much more about our perspective on how intelligence works in the world and how intelligence creates the world and how there is intelligence itself in the structure of stuff that's in the world in our books. So ecological rationality, as I said, is this fit between the mind and the world, and it enables adaptive and intelligent decision making. This gets achieved by decision mechanisms in the organism's heads that are adapted to challenges that reoccur, so that evolution and or learning can shape those decision mechanisms over time. And also then, as I said, the environment structures themselves are getting changed in ways that often make it easier for intelligent agents to be intelligent in their worlds, to be able to solve the challenges that they face. This is part of looking at an overall principle of how these two things interact, the environments and the minds, co-shaping each other through evolution and through learning. There's more than just that one book. There's a series of books about our research if you want to know more. Or you can ask me over the next 3 months or beyond. And I'm going to be focusing today on a particular aspect of intelligent behavior, and that is search, and specifically the cognition that underlies that search. And we have a book about that too. So why search? Why should we spend our time talking about that? I think it is a very important challenge that most organisms face for most of their lives. We have to search for things, for resources, whenever whatever we need or want is not already immediately in front of us. If it is distributed distantly from us in space or time, then search can be involved to find that stuff. That stuff can include things to eat, classic foraging, sources of water, other sources of energy, places to live, social partners of various kinds, but also immaterial things like information. And information can be in the external environment. It can also be internally in our own minds or memory. And we may be searching for solutions to problems. We may be searching for new cultural innovations, that will make our lives easier, etc. That's less good, okay. And also, we humans have created new modern things to search for that we didn't necessarily evolve specifically to search for, like places to live, like jobs which are distributed in space and time. And should I take this job that is available to me right now, or should I keep on searching until I find a better opportunity? That's classic example of search behavior. And other kinds of things that you may want to buy or be engaged in, or that could bring meaning to your life. Wide range of different kinds of things that we spend our time searching for. As we are searching, the stuff that we are searching for is in some environment and has some structure to it. And as I foretold, an important aspect of that structure is that the stuff that we're interested in might come in patches. And those patches can be defined in any kind of space or environment where we can think about things having distance. If things can be close to each other or far from each other, then we can get patchiness. And the patchiness is having some things that are close to each other and that are far from other things that are themselves close to each other. That's the rough definition of a patch. And we can see that clearly in space, in the two-dimensional representation here. We can also see that in mental space, like in the concepts that we have. We may think of some concepts as being closer to each other or further from each other. So we might think of cat and dog as being close to each other and a little bit further from chicken, which is close to duck. And all of those animals are far from things that we wear, like shoes and socks, but those are close to each other. So there are clusters in our semantic spaces, in our memory, and in external sources of information as well. But things can also be clustered in time. If we have time on the x-axis here and how many of the things we're looking for are appearing over time here, then these are patches in time of things appearing, and then during this period that thing isn't around. Like it could be migrating fish that you are looking for at a particular place, and they're only there some of the time, like with the tides, and then they come back and go away again. So we can have patches in time as well. And for these various different kinds of environments with patchy structure, what we've been finding is that similar kinds of cognitive approaches can help us or other organisms to look for and to do a good job of finding those things that occur in patches. We are assuming that what organisms want to do is do a good job of finding as much of this stuff that's in patches as possible. That is not what all of search is characterized by, but in the framework that we're talking about for today, we're assuming finding more stuff over time and space is better. And search, I think, is so closely linked to intelligence that when we see organisms that don't do any search, they don't look particularly intelligent to us. Like these sea pens, which are sitting on the bottom of the sea floor, and they don't have to look for anything. Everything that they need comes floating by them, and they just have to be there and have sticky, feathery fingers that are waiting to grab the stuff. And when food comes by, when gametes come by, they just get it and don't have to make any plans for how they're going to move around and find it. Another way that we see search being a hallmark of intelligence is having in mind the definition of intelligence is something that makes our challenges easier and something that we try to do less of if we possibly can in order for our lives to be easier. And search is something that we and other organisms put a lot of effort into trying not to do because it is challenging and does take a lot of time and has a lot of uncertainty to it. And so rather than us, for instance, having to go out and find food or the goods that we want to buy on our own, we can just sit at home and have some other agent bring those things to us, circumventing our need to do a search. Ants do this as well. Cataglyphis ants living in the desert are looking for other insects that have died in the desert that they can then go over to and bring back to their nests and eat. But they can't spend very much time on this search behavior, or they will also cook and die in the desert. And so if they can, they try to first find an elevated platform, and they in fact make these elevated platforms around their nest too, to be able to go on top of and survey the surrounding area and find where the prey may be so that they can just go directly to this. And Brian and I were talking about this as a strategy that the Hadza use as well. So these are ways of circumventing search, again pointing to the importance of search as an activity, as a challenging cognitive activity that we try to, when we can, find our ways of not having to do. So what do animals have to do when they are engaged in patchy search? The first step is to find a resource patch, to explore the environment and find a source of whatever the resource is that they are looking for. That's the exploration phase. Once they have found a patch, they need to stay in it and make use of it, exploit those resources. That's what they are there for, to find and get the resources that they want to use. That is the exploitation phase. And they will continue doing this as long as they are getting some resources. But over time, the laptop slowly reappears and the information patch comes back.
Is it just a bad connection?
Probably.
Maybe it's just, yeah, that's what it is.
It'll come back.
Yep.
Came back.
Great. And at some point, they need to decide it is time to leave that patch and go back to exploring and find a new patch. So you can think about if berries on a bush are being picked, at some point there might still be berries left in that bush. You could keep looking, but it might not be particularly rewarding to do so. You might get scratched up. There aren't that many left. They might not be ripe. You make a decision, okay, I think it's time to leave and find a new berry patch instead. One way of organizing these three different steps of the search process is called area restricted search, and I'll show you what that looks like. It allows for trading back and forth between exploring for patches, focusing on exploiting a patch once it's been found, and returning to exploring over time. Any questions at this point? Okay. So imagine a bird that is looking for patches of grubs that it wants to eat in this large field. We know this is where the grubs are. The bird doesn't know that this is where the grubs are. They're under the ground and it can't see them from far away. So what the bird starts with doing is the exploration phase of moving through the landscape, taking more or less straight and long steps, sampling at each point to see, is there a grub here? No, no grubs here. It keeps on going. Over here, it found a grub. And as soon as it finds a grub, it stops taking these long steps and switches to short steps, and short steps that also have high angle turns. So instead of going mostly straight, it's now mostly turning. And that combination of short steps and high angle turns keep it in the area. And sometimes it finds more grubs there, sometimes it tries in a place where it isn't finding one. It keeps on doing that, short steps, high angle turns, while it has been finding grubs. But then at some point, if it's not finding more grubs, it switches back to this mostly straight exploration phase, which takes it away from that patch where it was, where it has now depleted that patch, and takes it hopefully to where a new patch can be found, and it'll switch back to this area restricted part of the search once it finds another patch. Okay? People do that too when we put people into a lab setting where on a screen they are looking for treasure that has been buried somewhere in this landscape that we create for them, and we let them move their little character around digging in different places, much like the bird looking for grubs. In environments where we have put the stuff in patches, the gray areas represent where the rewards are. We see people explore a bit. They find a patch, then they stay in that patch, and then they leave it. Exploring, this person is just going straight across the entire landscape, finds another patch, and then exploits it, and then eventually leaves that patch, etc. And that's what you see in these different runs with different people. If the resources are instead spread evenly, diffusely across the environment, we don't see that kind of focus on local areas, but rather more of a space-filling kind of curve. And that's what we see in these examples here. Question?
Are they told in advance it's patchy or diffuse?
No.
So they learn about it.
So they learn the structure of the environment as they're exploring in it. And they switch what kind of search they are doing quite quickly between when they realize that it is patchy versus not patchy. Yeah, great question. Yep. So again, patches, mostly said this, are these locally dense areas of resources. The animal doesn't necessarily know how big the patch is, that is, how much resource there is in this area, until it is doing the exploitation part of its search, and it can find out more about how rich or poor this particular patch is. So they have to find the patches, they also have to find the stuff that's in the patches, and at each point in time, they know how much stuff have they found in this patch, but they don't know how much is left, and they have to make the decision, should I stay here or should I leave and go find another patch? How do organisms do that? One way to get at the question is to first try to figure out, well, what would they do if they were doing this optimally, if they were making the best use of their time and information to find as much resource over time as they can. And when that kind of mathematical analysis is done, the answer is to follow what's called the marginal value theorem, which says you should leave a patch if you would do worse by staying in the patch than by leaving the patch. Okay, that doesn't help us very much. A way that gets us able to actually answer that question is to say, well, what is my rate of return right now in the patch? Like, what unit or what amount of reward per unit of time am I getting in this patch currently? And what is the average rate of return I can expect in this environment overall? Is my current rate of return less than what I can expect on average? If it is, that means I should leave and go find another patch. Okay, that's a little bit closer to something we can think about. However, we and other organisms might not know those things, like the instantaneous rate of return is not something that you necessarily can have a sense of, especially if the resource that you're finding isn't something that you are continuously taking in, but rather is something that you find now, and then there's a pause, and you find another piece, et cetera, like lots of resources. And you might not know what the mean rate of return in the environment is. So organisms have evolved to use a variety of shortcuts instead, simple heuristics that lead to approximations of this optimal behavior. And that's what we've been exploring. So birds and some other animals use a simple and intuitive sounding approach of what's called the giving up time rule, which says if it has been too long since the last prey item I've found, I'm going to give up on this patch and leave and go find another patch. If I just found a prey item, I'm not likely to leave. I'm going to keep on looking for other ones. But if it's been several seconds or a minute, depending what the problem is, once I hit that threshold of time, I'm going to give up and leave. And so you can visualize what's going on there in terms of looking at how long the animal has been in the patch. Here it arrives at the patch. Each time it finds an item in the patch, we've got an X down here. And this is its tendency to stay. So if the tendency to stay is high, it's not going to leave. If the tendency to stay drops to 0, it's going to leave the patch. So the bird flies to a patch, lands there, starts looking, doesn't find anything now for a while, and its tendency to leave its tendency to stay should decrease, so that at some point it will leave the patch. And then if it finds something, that tendency to stay gets reset. And then while it doesn't find anything, it falls again, finds another item, its tendency to stay gets reset, falls again, finds another item, and then falls again, and it doesn't find anything. And when it's been past this giving up time, that's when it will leave the patch. Okay, so that's a simple rule that can effectively guide the organism in leaving patches at appropriate adaptive times. A couple of other simple heuristics that also can be very useful include a fixed number rule, which says as soon as I've found, so now we've got time on the patch here again, this is now the number of items that have been found in the patch so far. So found one item, that number goes up. Found another item, the number goes up. Found another item, the number goes up. And in this case, it had a threshold of when I find 3 things in the patch, I'm going to leave. So another very simple heuristic, only needs to keep track of number of things, not time in this case. This last one is a fixed time rule, which only keeps track of time. It doesn't pay attention to how much stuff is being found within that period of time. It just says, after 12 seconds, I'm going to leave, however much I've found or haven't found. Okay, so those are 3 simple heuristics. Why are there multiple heuristics? Because each of these works in different environment structures. So we can think about the distribution of patch sizes. We could have a world where all of the patches are the exact same size. That is a thing that can happen in some kinds of environments. We could have an environment where the patch sizes are normally distributed. Most of them have a middle size. There's a few that are small. There's a few that are big. That's another kind of distribution of patch sizes. We could be in a world where most of the patches have a medium number of things in them, but there's a few jackpots that you can hit an enormous berry bush. That's another kind of environment that organisms can be inhabiting, and different of those rules will do better in different of those environment structures. So if the patch sizes are all roughly equal, then looking for a fixed number of things. If you know that the patches all have 12 items in it, then as soon as you get to 10, 11 items in a patch, that's a good time to leave and go look for a new patch. If the patch sizes are randomly distributed, then each thing that you find in the patch doesn't tell you any more information of is this going to be a big patch or a small patch. So it doesn't matter how many things you find. That shouldn't affect your decision. You should just leave after a fixed amount of time. And finally, if you're in a world where some of the patches are enormous jackpots, then you should try to stay in those patches as long as you can. If you ever get to a jackpot patch, you don't want to leave it. You should stay there and get as much stuff out of it as you can. And a rule that will guide you to do that is this giving up time rule that says if you keep finding things in the patch, keep staying in the patch. And that will help you to exploit these giant patches. So we set up a game at the Max Planck Institute to study how humans are making these patch leaving decisions, to see whether people are using any of these simple heuristics, and also if they are paying attention to the environment structures and changing what kind of heuristics we use in different kinds of environment structures. We're smart. We should be able to keep track of such things and figure out what kind of environment we're in. We made a fishing game where the human participant was controlling a little fisher guy who, at the start of the experiment, came up to a pond, There's some number of fish in the pond, but they don't know how many fish are in the pond. Every once in a while, a fish appears at the surface, and they can catch that fish, and it goes in their bucket, and it also goes into their total number of fish that they've caught. At some point, the fewer fish that are in the pond, the longer it takes for the next one to appear at the surface, and the person may say, okay, I'm going to give up on this patch now. I don't think there's enough more here to wait for, and I'm going to go look for a new patch. And they press the big red next pond button, and their little fisher guy walks off to another pond. The subject doesn't have to control the exploration process. It just takes some amount of time, and then they get to a new pond, and they repeat this, and they do all that for roughly an hour, and we pay them for however many fish they caught overall. So they want to do a good job of not staying too short or too long in these ponds. Get as many fish as you can, get out when the getting's no longer good. That's what that all says. And we made 3 different environments for people to fish in. One, this is a histogram of the size of the ponds, the number of fish in the ponds. So this is number of fish in the ponds. This is what's the proportion of the ponds that had that number of fish in it. So this is a world where most of the ponds have 10 fish in them. Some ponds have 9 fish in them. So that's like the all ponds are equal world. This is a normally distributed world. This is a jackpot world where most ponds have around 6 fish, but there's a few ponds that have more than 30 fish. So what do people do? We can visualize it this way. This is showing the data from 20 different individuals. So we'll zoom in on one of these. This is time on the x-axis. This is number of fish that have been caught on the y-axis. And each blue line shows what's happening for this one participant in a particular pond. So this is all data from one participant. So the first in ponds, or the top line pond that they were in, what happened was they first caught a fish quite quickly, then no fish for a while, then they caught another one, nothing for a while, caught another one, another gap in fish, then they catch one, and so on, all the way up to this black star, which indicates that's where they said, I want to switch to another pond. So these black stars are their switching decisions, and depending on the pattern of those switching decisions, we can see is somebody using a decision threshold that is straight up and down. That means that basically they left when they got to 500 seconds. So that would be a fixed time kind of rule. If somebody had a decision line that was flat this way, that would be a fixed number rule. We don't see any of those. Mostly what we see is this upwards diagonal rule, and that says that the more fish that they caught, the longer they stayed in the pond. So that is like a giving up time rule. And most people were using that kind of rule. The more fish they found in a pond, the longer they stayed in the pond exploiting it. And they left after it had been too long since they caught the last fish. So that's the giving up time rule. And this resulted in them doing a very good job in the task overall, but especially if they were in one of those jackpot worlds. But they didn't change what they did depending on which kind of environment they were in. Everybody used this kind of rule, even if they were in a world where a different one of those rules could have been better for them. Why might that have been? There's various reasons, we think. One is that, first of all, it's hard for people to tell what kind of world they're in. We don't tell them. I didn't specify that before, but it is, again, like for the spatial case that I showed you, we don't tell them what the structure of the world is ahead of time. So they would have to try and figure that out if they were going to adjust what kind of rule they had. But since they are the ones who are controlling how long they stay in a pond, they might not stay long enough in ponds to find out, is this a really good one or not? So the environment can have a different structure to it, but the individuals navigating that environment might not ever actually realize that and make use of it. Okay. So that's what I wanted to tell you about looking at how people make these kinds of decisions in a sort of physical analog world. Colleagues and I got to join in with this, have looked at how do kids do this as well by setting up a physical manifestation of the pond search, where instead of ponds it was now different aquariums that kids could look inside each one of these aquariums, and there could be different interesting sea creatures hidden in there, or toy sea creatures, and they could say, okay, I want to look in this spot within this aquarium, in this spot, in this spot. Okay, now I'm done with this tank and I want to move to the next tank. And what we were looking at there was, can we also manipulate how kids are deciding on how long they want to search in different ponds by prompting them with ideas of curiosity, and that was the main aspect of this research. And curiosity indeed leads the young children to explore for more of the tanks over time and get through more of them and find out more about the possibilities that are facing them in the set of tanks that they are seeing. Andreas Wilke, who was a graduate student at our center at the Max Planck Institute and who did the fishing pond work, has also been more recently looking at how children understand patchy versus random environments. And he's going to be here giving a Beck talk in November. So look forward to that. Oh, that's way too many button presses. Okay. There we go. Okay. So now let's talk a bit about how people search for information. First of all, there's lots of information external to us, of course, and we store it in lots of different forms that are themselves patchy, like libraries. That's a big patch. A journal is a big patch of a different kind, and looking at one journal is one patch, and moving to another journal is another patch. Also, just the people around us are patches of information, and we come in clusters like Beck and other departments on campus. Information on the web is also structured in patches in terms of web pages and hierarchies of web pages. And people make these environments online clumpy as well by adding links that are shortcuts between related pages so that related information can be closer to other pieces of related information. And people then navigate all that in ways that look like foraging. And Paroli and Card talked about this as information foraging that humans are engaged in. And we do a good job of looking for, exploring for information patches, and then once we find them, doing a good job of efficiently sucking the information that we're interested in out of those patches and then leaving those patches and moving on to find other patches. So Paroli wrote all of this work up in a very nice book from 2009. One thing that's interesting, though, is that the online world, the structure of that world has changed over time. Again, intelligent agents changing their environment. We have changed the online environment so that it's not exactly that same kind of patchy structure over time. We have made ways of limiting what patches any one of us gets exposed to through echo chambers and other things that are excluding some of the range of the environment from us. And also we have algorithms that are creating the stuff that we get shown and doing that and changing how they do that in ways that are faster than people are able to adapt to. So some of the things I think that were talked about in information foraging theory originally no longer apply as readily to the information environment that we continue to change very quickly. And it's easy to quickly change the information environment, easier than changing the physical environment. And one final aspect of that is that the big companies are actually, again, trying to reduce the search that we have to do. Some of you may remember when you first started using Google that you would put in a prompt, you'd get a whole bunch of responses, and no, that's not quite right. Change my prompt, get a whole bunch of new responses, no, do that again. And that isn't what you wanted to do. You wanted to get your answer to the first thing that you put in, And that's what search companies have been trying over time to make happen more and more, so that we don't have to search, we just find. We just say, here's the thing I want, and then you get that thing. You don't have to engage in search anymore. I want to briefly say we're also looking at search in cultural spaces like music. This is a visualization of the patchiness of music, where this is a whole bunch of different dots of different colors. Each dot represents a band or a music artist, and they are displayed here in terms of their nearness and farness, where nearness is defined as two bands, two artists that a lot of people listen to both of them will be made nearer to each other. Artists where there's basically no human alive who listens to both Beyonce and Beethoven, that's probably not going to be right. They would be far apart from each other in this kind of clustering space. And then we can look at how do people navigate that kind of space. This is another representation of it now with names on there. Do people exploit a particular patch around uplifting trance music and then get bored with that and then start exploring and moving through the space and then find another one around fidget house? How many fidget house fans are in the room? No? I don't even know what that is. And then they exploit that one for as long as they're getting enjoyment out of that as well. Happy to talk with people more about that. But what I want to finish up with is looking at how people search for information internally in our own minds as well. And how much time do I have for that?
We started like 2 minutes late, so you can go till after.
Great. Okay. That will be about 10. Yep, that's perfect. Okay. So this part of our work starts with the question of whether or not the things that are in our heads are also clustered or patchy. The ideas we have, the concepts in memory, are autobiographical memories. Do those have a structure where some things are close to each other and some things are far from each other? It feels like they do in many ways. We want to explore that more and look at how people are searching through that structured environment in our heads. One of the ways of doing that is to use a task where we ask people, search through your memories and tell us what's in there. We don't do it that broadly. We constrain it rather more by saying, tell me all the animals you can think of in 3 minutes, or all the foods you can think of, or all the occupations you can think of. And that is called the verbal fluency task. It's a measure of how fluent are people with their concepts and their words. It gets used diagnostically, in fact, to see how well people are thinking. Also called the semantic fluency task if it's specifically about the concepts. Another version of it is asking people, say all the words you can think of that start with the letter F, for instance, and that's then the verbal fluency task. So let's try it. Let's hear some animals. Go. Out loud.
Cat.
Thank you. Great.
Panther. Monkey. Tiger.
Okay.
Wow. I'm grouping. Where did you go?
I hear some primates, more primates than I usually do. That's good.
Humans. Whales. Crabs.
Humans. Excellent. Good. So as you were doing that, I heard sort of stopping and starting, stuttering kind of production pattern there. Did it feel like you were coming up with some things and then running out of things, or?
Just felt a little strange to scream out animal names quickly.
Okay. You usually do it slowly, or? So this is also a rather different setting from how we usually do it. Usually it's one person at a time. You can also have 2 people doing it and going back and forth, which leads to some very interesting different behaviors that we've also been thinking about. But what often happens is that people produce animals or foods or occupations in clusters. So often people start with dog and cat and then think of some other kinds of pets, guinea pig, hamsters, ferrets. I know ferrets are not legal as pets here in California, but I may have lived with one for a while. I mean, an actual ferret, not a person who was a ferret. And it was in California, and it was an illegal pet. But brings back happy memories. And then, actually, and the reason why ferrets aren't pets in California is because of their threat to farm animals. So then you might start thinking about farm animals and come up with chicken, goat, pig, cow, etc. And then run out of those animals to say, and then think for a moment and come up with some other cluster, like sea animals, etc. And so it looks patchy, and if you look at the inter-item retrieval time, which is how long it takes an individual person to move from one animal to the next, that is to say the second animal after they said the first one, you see that there are lots of short IRTs when a person's in a cluster, and then long IRTs, and that usually looks like when they are moving to another cluster. And we can see that in this visualization of one person's production, where we've got time on the x-axis, and now the similarity between words, and the similarity is like the inverse of distance. The more similar they are, the closer we consider the words to be. And each shape is a different word that the person has produced, and they are plotted by when they produce them and also how similar was the word that got produced to the previous word. So this person started by saying dog and cat, which is very common for humans. As we'll see in a minute, that's relevant. And cat came very quickly after dog, and cat is very similar to dog in this case. And then they said hamster and rat, and then fish, and something else. And this yellow diamond is indicating when the person told us afterwards, after they said all these words, and then we showed them this list of words. We asked them, where do you think that you switched? The yellow diamonds show where they think they switched from one animal to another. And you see these yellow diamonds often after there's been a long pause in the production. So again, indicating that looks like people are switching, and they're switching after or as they are doing a longer time of silent thinking, moving through that space. So, please, yeah.
What are the two diamonds one by one there?
So, in that case, the person thought that the words that they were saying did not seem related to each other, which also is verified by the fact that the similarity between them was very low. And so even though there wasn't a lot of time between them, they were looking at this list and saying, yeah, those don't seem like they're very similar, so I think I must have switched. Which points to an important aspect of what we're trying to do with this work. We want to know when people switched. One way of getting some idea about that is to ask them, but as those of you who work with humans know, we don't have super good insights into how we're thinking always, and so that's not a sufficient way of finding out when people actually switch. We get some indications that people might think they're switching when they aren't, at least according to other measures, or that people say, I did switch when we don't, people are missing when we think they switched according to other measures also. Yeah, so that's a good indication of there being, in this particular case, a mismatch between what the person is saying and what we think was happening from other markers.
So there were more words, more dots.
No, so this is still all the words. It's in this case, the person may have had a reason for saying those two words near each other that actually make it look more like they are in a patch. And so they didn't think they were, but if we look at the time, that's an indication that they may have been in the same patch. Also, I'll show you in just a second, we have fMRI measures of what's going on in the brain, and there are signals of when people are making switches and not making switches, and in that case, there may not have been an indication of a switch going on in the brain either. So it was here the person just saying, I think that I made a switch, but other evidence not supporting.
This similarity measure you have is something taken from another group of individuals, or from, because for this particular individual, two animals could be similar because they had
Absolutely.
they had stuffed animals, right? Those two
Yep.
stuffed animals. So,
Yep,
so
that's
do you,
right. Indeed.
So do you ever address that? Do you ever get their individual similarity ratings on these items?
So not yet, but we did do this part about asking them where they thought they switched. Yeah. But you're right that the similarity measure that is being plotted here it's actually, in this case, is not based on asking a bunch of people about similarities. It's based on a trained language model that is looking at a broad corpus of text, and on that basis saying, here are the similarities between words. Yeah, great question. And we'll see more about this issue in just a second. One of the things we wanted to look at is when people are doing this task, are they making switches at appropriate times? Are they acting in a way that allows them to say as many words as possible, which was the instruction we gave them? So are they approaching an optimal level of behavior? Are people switching when they would switch as predicted by the marginal value theorem? And we can look at that in terms of how rapidly they are saying words and whether they switch when their rate of return falls below their average rate of return in the task overall. And indeed, that is what we find. This graph is flipped now, so this is higher means that they are taking longer on this task. And what we see down here is what position in a patch is a word being created at, where 1 means this is the first word in a patch, in a cluster of words that the person has made, and this is the second word. So all first words are shown here, all second words are shown here, and so on. And these are the words that come before that first word. And what is being plotted here is basically how inefficient they are in producing those words on average. So this is the average inefficiency, and as long as their current inefficiency is below that average, they stay in the patch. As soon as their inefficiency or their rate of return is beyond that average, that's when they switch and go into a new patch. So what people are doing is what an optimal agent in this task would do on average. That's all stuff that I said. We wanted to see whether or not there were indications of people switching that were covert in terms of their neural signals, in part to distinguish this foraging theory that says that people are strategically deciding when to switch when they are slowing down in the production of words. And so for that, we turn to fMRI. And that is in contrast to another possible model, which is that people are just taking a random walk through that space. And if a random walk is used, it also produces lots of small jumps staying in a local area and some large jumps every once in a while, but it doesn't do it strategically. It just randomly sometimes moves to a new patch. We wanted to see, are people also randomly moving to a new patch, or are they making the decision actively deciding when to move to a new patch? And so in order to do that, we put people in the scanner, had them do the task, and we looked to see, are there any differences in brain region activation when we think people were switching on the basis of looking at the similarities between the words they are saying, versus when they're not switching. Is there a signal in the brain for switching? And there are brain regions that are associated with switching in other tasks, so we had reason to believe we would be able to find such a thing. And indeed we did, in this case, in an somewhat unexpected area, which was in the hippocampus. We found significant differences in brain activation when people are switching from one patch to another versus when they're staying in the same patch. So people are making a considered decision of when to switch. And that's a paper that came out last year. So this indicates that people are indeed actively monitoring their success in this internal search task also, and making decisions to switch when their success is falling below their mean rate of success. So they're not just using a random walk. There's lots of things that we still don't know. What are the exact decision mechanisms that people are using to make that decision? How the hippocampus is implementing those decisions? We also need more direct ways of even knowing if semantic memory is patchy. And we're also interested in how other intelligences search this space. And I'm about to finish up on that. One of the big issues is how to tell when people really are switching. And we've been talking, based on your questions, about some of the complications of that. So there are many different ways that we could try to figure out, are people switching? We can look at the inner item retrieval time, as we've been talking about. We can look at the similarity between words, and when that spikes, that's an indication of a switch. People have made category structures of particular domains, like these Troyer norms, have a whole bunch of different animal categories, and so you could look to see, okay, a person is actually in the East African large mammal category now, and okay, now they have switched to another of the categories in this set of Troyer norms. And that's another way that you could try to figure out when are people switching from one patch to another. Brain activation patterns, what I just talked about, subjective reports asking people, or asking a whole bunch of other people, as was brought up. We could ask a bunch of individuals in the population that we're looking at, how similar do you think these animals are? Or also look at this set of animals that somebody has created and tell us when you think that they switched between one kind of category of animals and another. And that brings us to other intelligences, not just other intelligences of other humans, but also we thought we could look at how large language models, AI now, can do this task as well. Can it be used as a tool to help us figure out when people are switching in this patchy foraging space? Before we did that, we wanted to see, well, what happens if we just ask the large language models to, first of all, do that foraging itself? So I did some of that, asked ChatGPT, tell me all the animals you can think of in 3 minutes. And here's what it came out with: lion, tiger, elephant, giraffe, zebra, rhino, hippo, crocodile, alligator, kangaroo. It does pretty much what people do. There are clusters in here. It kept on going. Goat, cow, pig, chicken, dog, cat, goldfish, etc. So we can see a pet cluster. We can see a farm animal cluster, like people are doing. So it seems to do that, and then we wanted to see, can it also see how other people do? But interestingly, it doesn't take 3 minutes to tell you all the animals it can think of in 3 minutes. It only takes 30 seconds to do that, which is interesting. It's much faster than humans. Another interesting difference is that it didn't start with dog and cat, which is what human people in the US at least mostly do. And so I asked it, why did you not do that? First of all, I asked it, well, what would a person do? And when I asked what a person would do, it started with dog and cat as the first two animals that it came up with. So this is interesting behavior. You can play this game for a while. The next step in this game is to ask it, why? Why did you start not with dog and cat, but you said that humans would start with dog and cat? And then it gives super mentalistic explanations of that. That dog and cat are the first animals that would come to mind for people. But lion, tiger, and elephant was the first thing that came to mind for ChatGPT. Quickly coming to mind is, in fact, one of the parts of the foraging mechanism that we have proposed that people are following, that people are searching to get from one patch to another by thinking of very common animals. So interesting stuff going on there. At least interesting enough then to say, well, let's try ChatGPT to see if it can look at a person's list of animals and tell us where people switched, and indeed it can do. So this is saying, tell me where you think a person switched and why. And for instance, this is now the start of a new patch, and so it starts with raccoon and then skunk, and ChatGPT says raccoons and skunks are both nocturnal animals, mammals, often found in urban areas, so I think they are in the same patch. Then comes fox, and then it says foxes, as well as raccoons and skunks, are small to medium-sized wild animals, often found in forests, not for some reason it changed from urban areas to forests, not super consistent, and so on. Then it gets down to bear, and it says, well, those 4 things up above, raccoons, skunks, fox, and wolves, are all small to medium-sized wild animals, but bears are big animals, and so I think that the person made a switch to a new patch there. And it uses similar kinds of reasoning down here. So it looks like it is an interesting tool that also does make these patch distinctions at places where people make these patch distinctions. So we're looking into now using it as a tool for helping us to analyze people's searches. But also, as you can see, there's interesting stuff going on in how it is searching as well that we want to explore more too. All right. So I've told you about how people are searching in patches by strategically switching between staying in a patch and then looking for new patches when they need to. We think that the intelligent search that originally evolved for guiding patchy foraging in space got exapted through evolution to be used for looking in other kinds of spaces, including looking for social partners as a different kind of space, but also looking for information internally in our mental spaces. And we think that we can use LLMs to also get at that. Part of the thing that we think is an interesting sign here is that because the large language models are also producing animals and other stuff in patches, that is reflecting the nature of the data that they have been trained on, which humans have created. So we create patches in the language corpora that the models get trained on, and then they show those patches back to us. So again, the intelligent agents, us, are structuring the information environment that we and that LLMs get exposed to. So we think that we are seeing the mutual shaping there of clumpy external information environment and the clumpy internal representations of information as well. And that is where I'll stop, and I'm happy to take any more questions or discuss further. Thank you.